All right, guys, what's going on? Welcome back to the Everything College Football Podcast. Today, me and Nick here, we're doing our 2025 preview and prediction for the Oklahoma State Cowboys. One of this coaching staff, Mike Gundy, enters his 21st season as the lead man, 169 and 88 record all time. And then he brought in some new coordinators, veterans and Doug Meacham to run the offense. And then Todd Grantham will be the defensive coordinator. Respectable offseason. They hit the portal heavy, 40 guys they picked up in that realm, and then 54th nationally on the high school rankings. And then 3-9, first losing season for Gundy since 2005. The bottom finally fell out for them. Did a very disappointing season. Get things started with the offense. And a big reason why they were so disappointing, because this group was just abysmal. Despite getting Ollie Gordon back, they weren't very good in many games, which was very shocking because we thought this was collectively a pretty impressive group. From the wide receivers to the offensive line to the veteran quarterback, things just did not click. And of course, Alan Bowman was not very good. But they also were horrendous when it came to blocking up front. So there was just a slew of issues that led to them being drastically disappointing, returning only one starter from last year's unit. You start with the quarterback group. Zane Flores, a 3-star from the class of 23 from the state of Nebraska, had a great high school career, was noted to be a quick decision maker, has nice zip and placement, great feel for the position, doesn't have elite traits though. Haas Henji transfers in from TCU after just 1 year. He was a 4-star, possesses great athletic ability, has nice touch, and accuracy, can make plays on the move with a nice throwing motion. Pretty solid two-way battle here, Nick. These are two guys that many people probably haven't really heard of. We obviously didn't really hear about them either until as of late. But I think this is good for Oklahoma State. Alan Bowman, after 12 years of college football, moves on. They're going to give it to the youth. Who do you think is going to win on this battle here?
Oklahoma State's offense was absolutely horrendous last year, and I think Zane Flores is kind of the guy that takes over here and can really do something with this offense. This offense was abysmal last year. They were 111th yards per game on the ground, 115th in the nation. Only scored 27.2 points per game, 74th in the nation. Just absolutely abysmal across the board. And it wasn't really a Mike Gundy-like offense. They struggled to throw the ball. They were pretty good at throwing the ball in some situations, but they struggled to run the ball a lot. I beg your pardon, I made a mistake there. They were horrible at running the ball last year, and now they're plugging in a new quarterback, Alan Bowman. He certainly wore out his time. He had been in Stillwater for a very long time, and now they're going to start, option with two new quarterbacks here. I like what they have in Flores. I think he could sneaky be a solid quarterback for this team. 6'3", 215, has decent arm strength coming out of high school, was a decent decision maker, a lower end recruit, but a guy I think that's a high upside potential here. I think you're going to roll the dice a little bit. Gundy's worked with some quarterbacks that weren't stars in the past and got a lot out of them, was able to really fit them into the offense and make things work. I think Flores will be just fine in the system.
Yeah, I think a big asset is going to be Doug Meacham, the new offensive coordinator. This guy's an old school guy. Looks like they're going to be moving back to more of an air raid offense, a quick passing game, 3 to 5 wide receiver sets, getting vertical often. That's something they had back when Mason Rudolph was quarterback. The last couple of seasons, though, they kind of shifted to more of a pro-style offense that led to a lot of running, a lot of shotgun. There's a variation to the air raid of sorts. So I think Oklahoma State will be moving back to that now, Nick. I think good for them is that they have the young quarterbacks, they have arm talent, and they also have pretty good wide receiver depth. Start with Gavin Freeman. Only played 4 games last year before an injury, but, they feel as if he can be a slippery slot pass catcher. Spent 2 years prior at Oklahoma. Jalen Lloyd showed some good promise in 2 years in Nebraska. Versatile player, 5'10", 180. You have Christian Fitzpatrick, a great fit for the offense, a 6'4", 217 from Marshall. Had a near 600-yard season for the Thundering Herd. Sam Jackson, the converted quarterback to slot wide receiver, now on his 4th different school. They added Shamar Rigby from Purdue, who didn't do much last year in his debut season. They do get back Ayo Shamadi King, who's 6'4", 215, only had 5 receptions last year. Dwayne Lofton, a sneaky good ad. Had a few big plays last year despite limits to production for Virginia Tech. I think this is a pretty deep room. Above average group. I like the versatility. I think they will play quite well, Nick. So I think that this offense has some exciting aspects about them. And I really like the addition of Lloyd. I think he can be a real star for them. What do you make of this group that's really transfer heavy?
Yeah, completely revamped group here. They return only a couple of guys that got snaps last year for this team. Lofton played in 4 games, had 6 grabs for 140 yards, 23.3 yards for the grab there, so that's not bad. He's a pretty good slot option, very speedy. They grabbed him out of the portal in a previous cycle. I think Lofton could be really good for this team, probably the best receiver coming the end of the year. Lloyd comes over from Nebraska. I thought he was not bad last year for that team, 255 for him and 19.6 yards per grab. He had 3 scores in 2023 in limited games, so he's a guy that's got some big play threat, certainly there. Terrell Davis they add from Central Oklahoma, pulling him up from the FCS level, 6'1", 195, so a bit of a smaller receiver that could certainly be a speedy option in the slot. Fitzpatrick was a great add from Marshall. This guy's been around college football for a while, and he had a really good year last year. 576 for him, 16.9 yards per grab, and 6 scores. He'll certainly be a red zone threat in this Pokes offense. I like his potential there. They also added Rigby from Purdue. Didn't do a whole lot, but at 6'3", 190, he can certainly be a contested catch guy that could potentially be solid deep downfield. And then Sam Jackson was previously at Cal, TCU, and Auburn. He had 2 grabs last year, although one of them was a touchdown. So him in limited reps, he was not bad. He's a solid player from the Chicagoland area. They have Stoudemire King coming back as well, who didn't do a whole lot for them last year. So completely revamped room here. They're making a lot of different changes. They have a solid tight end in Josh Ford, who's a younger player as well. He had a few grabs, including a touchdown last year. So I think this group has certainly turned around a little bit. I don't love a full transfer room, at wide receiver, but they have a ton of depth, so I think they're going to find the right combination come the end of the season.
Yeah, aforementioned Terrell Davis had 1,600 yards, 15 touchdowns for Central Oklahoma. Could be a sneaky addition there. Looking at this running back room, of course, you replace a phenomenal player in Ollie Gordon. Trent Howland got the second most touches of the running backs last year. Enters his 5th year in college football. Has never really done much, though. Sesi Valahi, a redshirt sophomore who should get on the field more this fall. Redshirt freshman and Rodney Fields Jr. have an opportunity to compete. He's being a 3-star player from Oklahoma City. Caleb Hicks comes over from Oklahoma after 2 years of silence for them. I think the younger guys will get the longer leash in this offense, Nick, because they really want to figure something out. I think guys like Fields, they added a transfer in Freddie Brock as well from Georgia State, who was pretty productive. So I think this is a room that has some nice variety. What do you think here, Nick? Because they do replace Gordon. I think they have plenty of options here, but again, the run game was just so poor last year, it's hard to get excited.
They got to be better this year, right? The numbers are just absolutely abysmal. I rattled them off earlier. 115th in the nation, just not good enough running the ball. This is an offense that's got to find some balance between passing and running the ball, even if they're going to go for more of an air raid, air out approach. This year, Howland's not a terrible back, 230 in a score for him, 5.6 yards per carry, unlimited touches. Valahi had 2 scores as well in the red zone. He should certainly be a good red zone back. Rodney Fields had 99 yards and 1 score in his limited appearances, so not a whole lot of touches between these guys. I'm looking at, below 100 touches from all of these guys combined here, so certainly a lot of production that needs to be figured out throughout the season, but if they can even just improve a little bit here, I think it would go a long way for this offense.
Now we look at the offensive line. They dipped heavily into the portal to replace what was a veteran group. Markel Samuel, 6'4", 300, was a starter for Appalachian State, but wasn't all that good. Tyler Brumfield will compete with him coming over from Snow College. Left guard will be occupied by Avaka Tuakahau, who was a below-average starter for Weber State last fall. Kason Carpenter was a starter for Tulsa at center for 1 year, but was also quite lackluster. He's going to compete with the 315-pounder in Jacoby Sanders. Bob Schick was a 2-year starter at both guard spots for Virginia Tech. He was pretty good in pass protection, so I like that addition there. Austin Kowacki also in the fold, being impressive in a 3-game stretch toward the end of the year where he was needed as a swing guard. Grant Segren, who barely played last year at Nebraska, but is the favorite for the right tackle spot. Louis Canepa played 250-plus snaps at both right guard and right tackle over the last 2 years each at New Mexico State. So that's some nice coveted versatility and experience. Canepa is going to be, I think, a good player for them. I think this offensive line will probably struggle, Nick. Nice group of bodies, though, so they can mix and match a good bit. I think this group will be just fine once they start to hit a stride. But how long is that going to take? It could happen week 1 or it might come week 12. I'm not really sure. I think eventually they'll start to find consistency. But, man, this is it's a portal-rich group for the most part, Nick. And, of course, last year's group was phenomenally disappointing.
Man, I really don't like this. I hate going to the portal to replace your whole O-line. I know they lost a lot of players from last year's group, which wasn't a good group. But, man, you went into the portal, added 5 starters potentially there. I just don't like seeing that, and that really does kind of concern me in your O-line, which I think is a very key part of your offense. I think Samuel was an okay add at left tackle. Brumfield might beat him out there. That's an interesting position battle to watch. Grant Segrin, was okay at Nebraska at times. Bob Schick was an okay player as well. Carson Carpenter is not a bad younger player you can develop here. But I just don't like this. This offensive line was brutal last year. Part of the reason why they couldn't run the ball here. And you bring in a bunch of different guys who have, who are at junior colleges or failed at bigger schools. It just doesn't seem like a recipe that's going to add up for me. I mean, you're adding guys that were playing at, community college football last year, JUCO football last year, and trying to make that big jump up to the Big 12 where it's a fast pace, a physical conference. I just don't think it's going to work out great here. I think this is probably the worst offensive line in the conference, and it really does concern me as an Oklahoma State fan.
Yeah, harsh words there, certainly. B minus for me. I don't really know why I went with that. I think that they, have some nice stuff at quarterback. I think the offensive coordinator addition's a good one. I think they have some pass catchers. We're going to make some plays. Overall for the verdict, though, I think the Cowboys' offense has some real strong games last year, but they also had some poor ones. And I think they can find better consistency because, again, they're going to be moving back to more of a pass-heavy approach. Like the versatility at pass catcher. The offensive line has some solid transfers. It can be a quality unit, but it seems like the run game is going to be poor. QB battle, though, has ideal fits for the scheme, and they're loaded with youth. So high upside. I'm not hopeful for them to impress at this time, but I think that towards the end of the year, this might be a group that's to be reckoned with.
There is some upside here, right? I'm not going to think it's all doom and gloom. I think that the quarterback Flores is not a bad player. Potentially, I think he could develop. I think the running back room has some bodies that could be solid, and they added a lot of guys at wide receiver, so there's a ton of depth there. Curious to see which ones of those kind of shine. Fitzpatrick's the one I'm keeping an eye on. Lloyd as well. I do think Josh Ford's a very underrated young tight end who could show a lot. I'm worried about this O-line. That I'm super concerned about the talent level and the depth there. I think it's a big liability for this offense. I hate to be super harsh. I love Gundy, and I think he's really run some good offenses. I think Meacham's not a horrible hire at OC, but this is a transition year. That's really all it is. I think next year's offense in the future could be really good here, but I don't think this offense will be very good this year. I think more of the same, although I am expecting an improvement running the ball, probably closer to like 130 yards per game. I think that's a kind of a realistic goal to set because I do like the bodies they have here. It's going to rely on the O-line play, though. If that O-line play is bad again this year, it could be a very tough year for the Pokes offense.
And I move to the defense. You talk about worst in the conference. Well, this part of the team was the worst in the country. They were just abysmal on the defensive side of the ball. You remember week 2, Nick, they gave up 648 yards against Arkansas in a game they won because they came up clutch and forced 3 turnovers, but man, they were just getting annihilated, almost 7 yards per play. This was a common theme throughout the year. 6.8 yards per play on average, and of course that number was lowered down by playing some, sluggish opponents. They were just not good at anything. They returned 3 starters to start up front. The defensive end group added a nice transfer, Kyron Dahan, who was an impressive player as a freshman. He had 7 sacks and did work versus the run. Deshaun Brown wasn't all that bad in his nearly 400 snaps of action. Landon Dean only saw a few, though, of his own. The interior defensive line returns Amon Otis. He was horrid despite playing a ton of snaps, a 6'3", 305. Aiden Kelly, 315-pounder, enters his 5th year in the program. Doesn't even have 10 total tackles, though, as he's barely played. Michael Diata, a much-improved run defender, is a 2-year starter for UVA. Satavi Havil Kufasi, a 300-pounder from UCLA who saw 500-plus snaps across 3 years. He was mainly quiet, though. Pretty underwhelming group here with less than ideal depth. Of course, Colin Oliver got hurt last year. Ended up departing for the draft. This group was obviously, Nick, it wasn't great, and I think that they don't have enough bodies compared to last year, so it might even get worse.
Yeah, this defense was brutal last year. If you thought I was harsh on the O-line, I'm going to be very harsh on this defense because it was just downright abysmal, and that's a really big problem for this team because when your offense is not firing on all cylinders and then your defense is playing at the level they were, you're not going to get bailed out of any games. And that Arkansas game, they were lucky to get a win in overtime, double overtime in that one because they forced those turnovers, like you mentioned. There's 648 yards given up. That's like the type of numbers you put up if you're playing CFB 26, you're running the score up against an FCS team in your dynasty, or you're just running around in circles, lobbing deep balls. That's just a video game like number here, and it starts the defensive line. That's a weak unit. I think if you want to look at a highlight there, at Deshaun Brown, I think he'll take a huge step forward. 14 total tackles, 4 tackles for loss, a sack for him last year. I like him. He profiles to be a really strong player coming off the edge. Iman Otis had 25 total tackles, 3 tackles for loss, 2 sacks last year. Jaleel Johnson had 21 total tackles, 3 tackles for loss, 2 sacks coming off the edge as well. Those are some guys that could potentially be okay for this team that are not bad. Johnson may get involved come end of the season here. I think they added some interesting pieces. Kyron Duhan from UTEP was a solid add. He actually is a player that I think could be pretty solid, a speedy rusher there that could really be involved. Demarion Thomas coming over from Vanderbilt. He didn't do a ton for that team. 34 total tackles, a sack for him. He's a bigger body as well. That'll be solid in the interior. Malik Charles, he's bounced around at a bunch of different JUCO schools, so I'm not sure what his ability to perform at this level is. That Micah Diata had 2 tackles for loss at QB Hurry and half a sack and 31 tackles at Virginia last year. Definitely a weak unit here. I like that they went in the portal and they tried to address some needs. I think Deshaun Brown is a very underrated player coming off the edge there, but I'm still very concerned about this unit.
I look at the middle of this defense. Jaleel Johnson, he can play outside linebacker or at defensive end. Who wasn't all that good in his 300-plus snaps last year, though. Added a few transfers to the battle with him. Malik Charles, he was good for West Georgia last fall. Chandavian Bradley arrives from the JUCO ranks, and Rashad Bradley also comes from JUCO. Those two are not related. They also get Brian McCoy at middle linebacker coming back. Or coming over, that is, from Akron after being a 2-year start. He was very sound versus the run, so hopefully he can bring some of that prowess to the table for the Cowboys. Brandon Rawls comes over from Saginaw Valley State. Trip White spent 3 years at Ole Miss but barely played. Ike Asanawuni enters his redshirt sophomore season with no playing time to his name. Subpar group at best, Nick, but linebacker has been a nice area of playmaking for this team for a couple of years. Now those guys are gone. The aforementioned Oliver. Nick Martin was tremendous. He was limited to only 5 games last year. And then in years past, they've had some good linebackers as well, like Mason Cobb, Xavier Benson. So this has been a group that they've been able to get a lot out of in the past, Nick. But I just read off a bunch of random colleges. JUCO, Saginaw Valley State. It's just like, we have a strategy here. Looks like they're sticking to it. But is this going to be enough to really improve anything?
No, I don't think so. This is a linebacking core that was brutal last year, and they lost their best players, and they're going to be brutal again this year. I think Jaleel Johnson could play at edge or play at linebacker. He's a very versatile player. I'm curious to see what he looks like. Probably a more traditional linebacker, but again, I highlighted his potential as a pass rusher earlier, so I think you can find a way to get him involved there. Malik Charles is the guy that's just bounced around college football at the JUCO level. Not sure what he's going to profile into. Brian McCoy comes over from Akron. I think he was a pretty strong player for them, right? 120 tackles last year, 3 QB hurries, 2 pass breakups, 94 the year before that. So he's been a tackle machine. If anyone's going to step up, it's McCoy here. I think he profiles as the best potential linebacker for this team. Could be a very sneaky good ad come the end of the day. Trip White comes over from Ole Miss, who had a singular tackle last year, so not a whole lot of potential there, although he's 6'3", 225. I do like some of the size on him. Tajay McCoy comes over from Colorado, where he had 4 sacks last year, 2 QB hurries, and 23 total tackles, so maybe some pass rush pressure there. But the rest of this list there, you rattled off a bunch of guys that played at JUCOs, didn't do a whole lot at their other lower tier programs here. I'm still very concerned about this linebacking core, although I do think it's nice they went out and added a bunch of different bodies. I'm just not sure how much production those guys can have.
And Darius Thomas from Western Kentucky played about 600 snaps, but he was a very poor run defender for them, so it's not the strongest collection of talent by any means. You look at the secondary, Cam Smith is back after a sluggish season at corner, but he was solid versus the run. You have Cale Smith, who played a good bit but was poor as well, and will lose a chance to start to the incoming Jalen Davies, who's been an elite run defender in his career, inconsistent coverage, but a great ad here from UCLA. Only 11 missed tackles in his 3 years as a starter, so a gem right there, Nick. That's the highlight of the portal class. J.K. Johnson, a former high-ranked recruit, has barely played in his career. He was at schools like Ohio State and LSU, hoping to get on the field here now finally. Kenneth Harris and Raymond Guy both saw some reps, so some nice depth here and a few options, but overall skill might be in question, but it's a nice starting duo, I'd say, in Smith and Davies. Safety group gets back Dylan Smith, who will shift into the slot after playing all around this defense last year. He was very poor as a starting free safety, though. Parker Robinson played 10 games and will occupy a starting spot of his own, but was also not that good. Cameron Epps didn't have much of a role outside of the slot last year, only playing in 7 games. This is a guy who had an elite breakthrough season back in 2023, so they're hoping he can find a way back into this secondary and bring some playmaking to the table. Mordecai McDaniel, 6'1", 200, arrives from Charlotte. He was very good for them. 2023, though, he was at Florida, and he was abysmal. He was not very good one bit, playing in a higher tier conference, so we'll see what he can do jumping back into a Power 4. Secondary should improve. I like what they got at corner. I think the safety should progress, Nick, and this is another area where they were terrible, but I'm going to pinpoint it as the biggest strength on this defense. If you can find one, I'd say this is one that's kind of glaring as the clear strength for them, so I think they can build off being, pretty much a dead last against the pass.
Yeah, I guess you can find some improvements here, and I do think this is the best part of a bad defense. I think some of the names here are not bad. Parker Robinson, 49 total tackles, 2 tackles for loss, 2 picks, a pass breakup for him. He's not a bad player. That's versatile. Dylan Smith, 42 total tackles, a tackle for loss, and a pass breakup. But he struggled. Cam Smith, 34 total tackles, tackle for loss, a pick, and 7 pass breakups. He was not terrible in coverage. Cale Smith, 31 total tackles, 1 pick, 6, and 5 pass breakups for him. He was okay at times as well. The rest of this unit, they added a bunch of different names from the portal here. Davies, obviously probably your best ad from UCLA. He had 2 pass breakups, 30 total tackles. The year before that, he had 43 and 6 for the pass breakup, so he was a good coverage asset there. DeAndre Boykins comes over from North Carolina. He's been bouncing around and not really done a whole lot in his career. He had 6 total tackles there last year. Kind of an interesting name to see on the list. McDaniel coming over from Charlotte. He was okay for them last year. He was previously at Florida and didn't do anything there. He did play a stint in community college as well. J.K. Johnson's been at high-level programs, but only had 3 tackles last year. Not really that productive. Hoping to get a chance to get on the field. And Zaquan Patterson comes over from Miami with 19 total tackles and 3 pass breakups. He was okay for them. Again, another weak unit. Probably the best part of this team, but they were brutal last year. 132nd in the nation against the pass. 285 yards per game, 500 yards per game given up as a total defense. Just abysmal across the board, 35 points per game given up. I got nothing more to say about this defense. It was a very bad unit, and I'm not sure it's going to be much better this year.
They look at the defensive verdict for the Pokes. This is a team that was as bad as you can be last year on this side of the ball. And like, we won't get any better because the front seven is just not very encouraging. I don't think the secondary is the worst ever. They have a nice cornerback duo and some depth along with experience at safety. So that group I'm kind of hopeful for. The rest of the defense is going to be quite horrid. Todd Grantham coming over, Nick. Obviously, we probably still have a bit of a sour taste in our mouth, even though it was a long time ago, back in 2021, where he got fired at Florida for just not having a very good defense. He got fired, and a week later, they beat Samford in a shootout, 70-52, where the defense he left got absolutely smoked by a FCS team. They should have not had that happen too. So that's how we remember Todd Grantham, Nick, and now he has to come in and just fix this mess. I just don't know if it's going to work.
Seems like a weird person to bring in when your kitchen's on fire. It's like bringing in a police officer when the house is burning down. You want a firefighter, not a police officer. May not be a great analogy there, but I'm struggling to find a good comparison because he's just a bad coach at Florida, and this is a bad defense. I mean, the stats are just atrociously bad. I do like some of the portal ads. I think they brought in some decent names. Duhan's not bad. I think Brian McCoy could be really good for this team coming into the season. He'll certainly be the top tackler because he has a lot of work cut out for him at linebacker. He was a really good ad. I like what he can do, but this is just a very low-profile defense. I just don't think they're going to be very good. They're going to get torched again this year. I don't know if they'll give up 500 yards per game because that's kind of crazy to give that up 2 years in a row, but it certainly won't be a good number again. This defense in for a long season. I think they'll transition and be good in the future, potentially, but man, they're going to be brutal this year, and I hate to be so negative, but damn, this defense is just not good.
Now I move to the schedule and the prediction for Oklahoma State. I'm a big fan of Mike Gundy. Love how good of a job he's done with this program. Maybe they can get back on track with new coordinators and money being removed from his contract in effort to spark more NIL opportunities. He's clearly committed, and that always makes the Pokes dangerous. But this team for 2025 just doesn't flatter me one bit. Wide receiver group, I think, can come around, and if the QB spot plays good ball, then the script, I think, can certainly flip. But we've just seen too much inconsistency from the offense last year, despite having a lot of talent. Defense was awful. I think, collectively it'd all be better. But how much better is the question mark? In 2024, slightly better. Would have won them a good amount of games, though, Nick, because they played a lot of close contests. I think they struggle a good bit, but, they're going to play lots of tough games at home, which will definitely give them an upper hand. I don't think it's going to be pretty. 4-8, 3-9. Mike Gundy can win you 9 games, Nick, and we wouldn't be shocked one bit, even with everything negative we just said about him. So I think that's kind of that. I think it's going to be a poor, tough year for him, but I think that can certainly make him dangerous in 2026 because Gundy really is an elite coach. Again, first losing season, 20 years. So he knows what he's doing, and again, he's committed to this program. So I think that this is going to be, a bit of a building block year for them to do damage potentially in 2 years.
I hate to be so harsh because I really do like Mike Gundy, and I've always had a soft spot for what he's done because, he's been phenomenal at this program. Like I said, first losing season in 20 years, had a chance almost to go to the national title game in 2011, took them to 2 conference title games in 21 and 23, and just ran into some buzzsaw teams there. Maybe was the better team overall besides Texas. If you take Texas out of the equation, they were the best team in the Big 12 in 2023. I love what Gundy can do. I think he's a phenomenal coach, but this is just going to be a long year. And if you're a season ticket holder at Oklahoma State, I don't necessarily blame you for canceling your ticket plan this year because this team is just going to be atrociously bad. I think they know that, but Gundy has a very long leash, which he deservedly does because he's been there for so long and has done so well with this program and turned them into a contender in the conference for year in, year out, and was able to get a lot of productivity out of them long term. I'm at 3-9 again. I think it's a disappointing result, certainly, if you're an Oklahoma State fan. They brought in a lot of different guys from the portal that could potentially boom in the future. I just don't know if I see it right now. I have questions on the offense. I have questions on the defense. The defense was abysmal last year. The offense was abysmal last year. And I really do hate to be negative, and I do not want to trash on a program that's such great history with the coaching and really been phenomenal. But this is just a bad down low period here. I think you'll get better in the future. You'll be able to build off this. I think the defense will improve. I think the offense will improve. But again, another 3-9 campaign for me. I'm curious what the future looks like for Gundy, particularly 26 and 27. But 2025 is going to be another very forgettable year in Stillwater, and I do feel bad for the fans, but I think brighter days are coming in the future. Hate to trash a program that we both really like, but it's just abysmal when you're bringing in a whole new portal class on both sides of the ball and that were bad units last year. I can't really be that excited for it. I think it's going to be a struggle season in Stillwater, but I am curious to see how the future looks past this year.
When I said close games, I had about 3 or 4 of them last year. They lost 3 in a row. Went on the road to BYU, and I was like, the Pokes are going to hang around tonight, and they should have won that game. They ended up giving up a score, just a couple seconds left. Peak college football cinema right there, a Friday night in Provo, close game. how amazing that was. But it was just it summed up their season, Nick. This is how bad it was. Nothing would go right for them, and even when it was, could not seal the deal. And like you said, we both love the program, so I hate to see it. And they didn't win a game after starting 3-0 for the rest of the year, so it was very disappointing. But this team's always going to bring exciting games, Nick, and I think the ones at home especially could potentially scare some people this year.
Yeah, I think there'll be an upset or two potentially on the schedule. We have, not getting a whole lot of wins, but maybe you shock Kansas State, maybe you shock Iowa State to wrap up the season, or Baylor early in the year. This is a program steeped in tradition. They have a great fan base that will still be loyal. I know I made a joke about, canceling tickets, but this will still be a very loyal fan base that will come in week in and week out and support their team. Curious to see what the future looks like, though. A tough season in Stillwater, unfortunately.
Make sure to like, comment, subscribe. See you next time.